Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, listeners. Here, as the podcasts by SKA are gearing up around significant components of our immune system, he has today decided to bring for you a fresh new perspective surrounding immunity. With different forces playing their part in generating an immune response, we have another expert today with us to discuss the forces of nature complementing and supplementing this system. Here, your host, SKA, will introduce our guest and this interesting new light in which immunology can be viewed. Over to you, SKA.
Welcome back to the podcast. Just to recap few things before we start, that we have talked about innate and adaptive immunity as a part of our immune defense mechanism against invading pathogens and cancer. And we learned two basic fundamentals about the immune response. One is that we are born with the innate immunity that forms the first line of defense, which is always ready to act in an antigen non-specific manner, and generally doesn't induce any kind of memory. While the subsequent activation of adaptive immune response, it brings in antigen specificity through activation of antigen-specific T and B cells, and then generation of memory against the invaded pathogen. So in the last episode, I discussed the important role being played by antigen-presenting cells as master regulators of subsequent immune response, both in health state as well as in disease. And before I go on to discuss further the activation of antigen-specific B cells and generation of memory cells, I thought it will be worthwhile to discuss another very interesting aspect that relates to innate immunity. So in order to make my point, let me once again explain in context of an infection that has been witnessed by all of us in recent past, and many questions still remain unanswered about that. We all observed that majority of individuals who were exposed to SARS-CoV-2 virus during the COVID-19 pandemic recovered with no symptoms or a very mild disease. And only about 10 to 15% had moderate disease. And out of those, only 2 to 3% had a severely complicated course of disease that required oxygen therapy. So what could be the reasons of this diverse response to an infectious agent? So let's ponder on that. Apparently, it looks like that those who had milder disease were the people who had a better capacity to handle this virus. That indicates a more competent innate immunity as compared to those who developed the severe course of disease. So this is a very general statement about SARS-CoV-2, but it is true for almost every kind of infection and even cancer, because every individual reacts differently to any infection and even cancer. So the question comes in most of us we would like to ask is that what are those mechanisms which are different, and can the immunity in any individual be strengthened or boosted to the level that the person develops a capacity to fight with the infection or cancer with only minor disease? So speaking from an immunologist's point of view, we can say that number one, such kind of immunity is inherent and mainly depends on the genetic makeup of the individual. So some people by birth, they are quite, capable to handle the infections better than the others. But then there are many other factors which also play a role. For example, geographical, location of that person, environmental, nutritional, general lifestyle, like whether a person is doing a lot of exercise or not, and so on and so forth. So there are many reasons which can handle that. But I would like to bring a very important fact in front of you guys. It is very interesting to know that 97% of the total biodiversity on this earth, which includes the plants and invertebrates or the microorganisms, they do not contain any evidence of an adaptive immunity. And this adaptive immunity basically leads to antigen-specific immunity along with generation of memory. So imagine that this 97% of the the microorganisms or the plants which are living on this earth, they were able to survive for so long without having a antigen-specific immune response in them. In spite of they must be having many onslaughts with many other organisms. And interestingly, many recent research studies have also shown over the last almost 2 decades that has provided the evidence that immune system of plants as well as invertebrates is primed by the initial infection and then leads to protective efficacy against subsequent infections with diverse microorganisms, which clearly indicates the development of certain kind of sensitization or priming against these microorganisms. So this is a little interesting point because these organisms normally doesn't have that adaptive immune response, but they do have capacity to memorize and get sensitized to one particular organism, but develop capacity to have protection against diverse, organisms. And similar to this, some kind of memory characteristic in the innate immune system of the vertebrates has also been recently described. And this particular phenomena is referred to as trained immunity. So trained immunity is a process that results in a heightened reaction to secondary infections or sterile triggers of inflammation. So it has also been seen that certain infections and vaccinations can induce broad cross protection against other pathogens through innate immune mechanisms. And we can find the evidence in literature that if an animal is given repeated low doses of pathogen or a molecule, like, for example, the bacterial lipopolysaccharide or any other ligand for any TLR, it leads to generation of a state of tolerance against that pathogen molecule. And it is termed as LPS tolerance in case of LPS exposure, which is also an adaptation of cellular responses to an external stimulus. But this leads to a lower inflammatory response to a secondary stimulation. So these studies have led to the hypothesis that the innate immune system also exhibits characteristics of some kind of memory to the exposure by a pathogen, which has also been termed as the trained immunity. So, and we also understand the property of so-called trained immunity. It will help us better understanding of host defense mechanisms because it is the innate immune response which is generating certain kinds of memory now. And if we try to understand the pathogenesis of immune-mediated diseases and other host defense mechanisms, it will help us better understand that. And it has also been shown that this kind of trained immunity can last for about 3 months to maybe up to 1 year. It is important to understand that this trained immunity is generally reversible and shorter-lived than the classical immunological memory, which is generated by the antigen-specific adaptive immunity. It is also very interesting to find that the live vaccines can induce heterologous protection against infections by other organisms which can last for even 5 years or little longer. And many recent studies have also suggested some kind of transgenerational effects through induction of trained immunity. So let us see what are the possible mechanisms for generation of such a phenomena, which is very interesting. So if you go into the literature, we find that the concept of trained immunity describes the functional and epigenetic reprogramming of innate immune cells. Such changes are evoked by some exogenous or maybe endogenous insults that leads to an altered response towards a secondary challenge after the innate immune response has gone back to non-activated state. The secondary response to the subsequent challenge to a diverse pathogen or a non-specific stimulus can be altered in such a way that the cells respond more or less strongly than the primary response, and conferring both context-adjusted as well as time-adjusted responses. So in this context, there are different stimuli like bacterial lipopolysaccharide or fungal beta-glucans or even BCG vaccine. You all know that BCG vaccine is given for protection against Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So these all kinds of pathogen-associated molecules can induce different kinds of trained immunity programs. And we should understand that this trained immunity is not driven by gene recombination, which we generally see in the adaptive immune response, but it is mediated by epigenetic reprogramming of the transcriptional pathways. But as we find, there are many other perspectives. So we have this kind of perspective that, okay, we have either genetic makeup or some kind of other mechanisms, including trained immunity. It brings in certain kind of difference in the response to the exposure to pathogen. But there are many other perspectives where there are claims of maintaining even boosting the basic immunity through other means, which include the traditional medicines, Ayurveda, yoga, or naturopathy. And we may try to understand the other point of view as well. So today, we have invited a qualified naturopath who has very kindly agreed to give the naturopathy point of view of how such immunity can be maintained or boosted. And let me introduce our expert, Sukhneer, who has been a career educationist and a trained biologist, and she understands the basic principles of science and health very well, but she has also acquired her training as a naturopath. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's listen to what Sukhneer would like to say about the internal capacity to fight with the infections. So, hello, Sukhneer. Welcome to our podcast, and thanks for joining us today. As you see that I have been talking about fundamentals of immunity against various pathogens and cancer. And we have already discussed the innate immune response, which provides the first line of defense against these invasions. We have also talked about some first few concepts of activation of antigen or pathogen-specific T cells, which is related to generation of adaptive immune response. Being a qualified naturopath, can you reveal the perspective from naturopathy point of view, how you think that the capacity to fight with the infections can be looked at from your point of view, from the naturopathy point of view? Over to Sukhneer.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Sunil, for inviting me in this series, which is very informative. As I'm going through all your podcasts, listening all the podcasts, I was a teacher, I was an educationist, and then this naturopathy came in my life as a serendipity. and I joined the course. So after getting the in-depth knowledge of all the naturopathy processes and all the naturopathy treatments, a very positive change came in my life. And I'm sure that after all these positive changes, now I can handle my health and all other issues much better. So today, before saying anything about naturopathy, I will just like to say that it's not actually a pathy in real sense. It's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle which helps us in fighting against the diseases and living a good life. And this lifestyle, it depends on the major principle of naturopathy, that is nature's healing power. Healing power of nature is inherent in all living beings, and it is self-organizing. It is intelligent. As you said, during COVID-19, there was a lot of difference in the immune response of different people in different places. Now, immunity depends on a huge network of intricacies and connectedness of a human response. So, according to this philosophy, all this depends on three major factors. The most important factor here, which normally is vital for everything, that is the vital force. Vital force animates and perpetuates all living beings. And it is the fundamental fuel that activates and optimizes our physical, emotional, cognitive functions like consciousness, perception, thinking, judgment, and memory. So vital force is the most important force. Second important factor is the predisposition of a person for a disease and a contagion. It is also called diathesis. And third is accumulation of foreign or morbid matter in our system. So these three fundamental forces of naturopathy, vital force, predisposition, and accumulation of morbid matter, is the cause of all the diseases and disease fighting capacity. In all the previous podcasts of Dr. Sunil, it became clear that our immune system is doing a remarkable job in defending us from diseases. But still, it fails sometimes. An organism enters our body and we get sick. When the germ invades, then a person gets sick, symptoms appear, and a naturopath will start thinking that there is definitely the vital force of a person is lowered, and the composition of blood and lymph is changed due to the accumulation of the morbid matter, and inherent capacity, no doubt, is doing its job. So here now, if we talk about the treatment system, the basic concept on which the treatment of naturopathy depends is that the whole cosmos, including our body, our cells, everything is made up of 5 basic elements. And these 5 basic elements are the major constituents of everything in the universe. And we call these 5 elements Panch Mahabhutas. So Panch Mahabhutas is the basis of treatment. These 5 elements are earth, number 1, water, number 2, fire, number 3, air, number 4, and ether, number 5. And nowadays, we have added 2 more elements, that is the diet and the prayer. And we use these elements in their natural form to revitalize and rejuvenate the body and strengthen the whole immune system against disease-causing agents and in and around our body. A naturopath prescribes or make a regimen and uses the techniques and tools to balance these 5 elements in our body. There is a huge literature on each element, but I can give a few examples here. Like to balance these 5 elements, naturopaths, they are using soil in a different way. They are using water in the form of drinking in different methods, different times, different quantities, and using the water over the body. And then using breathing techniques, which is the most important techniques these days. So breathing techniques, there is a lot of studies, huge kind of techniques in the breathing control process. Then we can use mudras, and we can use sunlight and color therapy. And last but not the least, prayers have a very, very effective. Prayers, or you can call it faith. Faith has a very important role. So in naturopathy, it's not the disease only or the symptoms which are considered, but the whole body of a person is treated. The whole body is rejuvenated, whole body is strengthened, vital force is strengthened by using these elements in their natural form and in different ways. So I think now after talking this, we know that there is no cure available for many infections and diseases till this date. And after having an in-depth knowledge of immune system and all the methods of increasing vital force, and by balancing our 5 elements, an inclusive approach of these 2 important systems is very important. And with this inclusive approach, it may be very good to suggest preventive ways to make people healthy and live a very good, healthy life free of infections. So I think that's enough for today.
Thank you very much, Sukhnir, for a naturopath perspective of how we look at the uh, vital force being the internal force which can protect us from the disease. So that brings us to understand that I will conclude that besides the antigen-specific immunity and memory generated in adaptive immune response, the innate immune system also has the capability to adapt and memorize the exposures by pathogens, which leads to certain kind of epigenetic and metabolic reprogramming in the innate immune cells. And such adaptations result in generation of either a tolerance against the same pathogen if repeatedly exposed to low doses, and also develops a kind of immunity against diverse pathogens on subsequent exposure, leading to a quicker and more robust protective response. This is because of the trained immunity. And now Sukhnir has shown that the naturopathy can fine-tune our immunity by looking at the 5 basic elements. So that brings us to the end of this episode. Till next time, goodbye and thank you.